Hey guys, it's Callum, my review for Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. And what Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald is essentially about is we still focus on the character of Newt Scamander, and he is recruited by Albus Dumbledore to help him take down Grindelwald, who he has personal ties to and therefore cannot move against him, but he feels that Newt could be the person to aid him, and basically the rest of the film is them trying to track him down and try to thwart his plans. So, Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, I'm going to be honest here. The first movie I enjoyed a lot. I thought it was very creative and different. It did a good job of expanding the universe, but not being so reliant on the fandom and the, the lore of the Harry Potter universe. It was able to expand and build off of it and use it as a foundation, but it didn't use it, it wasn't the sole focus. The sole focus was telling a different story, and I think it did a good job of that. It was a nice, lighthearted tale, and I was excited to see where the second film would go. That being said, none of the marketing for this film has impressed me. All of the trailers, I think, were just very whatever to me. I couldn't really tell where they were really going with the story, and I was hoping that meant that they were saving something really great for this film, that maybe I go into this film and it would really surprise me. I'd be like, okay, now I understand why the trailers were so lackluster, because they were clearly hiding what the movie was truly about, and I was hoping that that's what would happen with this film. Unfortunately, it's actually the other way around, where Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald is basically everything I expected to be, but also somewhat worse. This is the definition of exactly what not to do in a sequel, and we're just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. Now, I'll say it right now, there's a lot of problems with this movie, but the cast really isn't one of them. I still think everyone is very well casted here. Eddie Redmayne especially, I still really do like as Newt Scamander. He's still just as quiet and reclusive, but he also still is very charming. He's a lot of fun to watch in this role. He's a little bit more open to people. He's really solidified bonds with Tina and Jacob and all of them, and I did enjoy watching him here. He's still a very good lead character, and I still think Redmayne does do a good job. Admittedly, Newt does not have that much of an arc in this film, but that's not really Redmayne's fault. Redmayne really does try to bring as much of this character as possible, and I still think he did a really good job here. And then these next three I'm going to talk about as a group because Dan Fogler, Katherine Waterston, and Alison Sudol still all do a great job as the characters of Jacob, Tina, and Queenie. I enjoyed them a lot in the first film, and they definitely have a lot of fun stuff to do here. They don't have as much to do in this film. Jacob especially, I thought, was kind of shortchanged here. But for what they have, they still work very well together. I still very much enjoyed their chemistry throughout this film. You can tell that their chemistry, I think, was actually a little bit stronger in this one. And I really did like what we got with all four of them here. I still think they're all very fun characters to watch. Between Jacob being the muggle and him being a little bit more on board, but still a little bit bewildered by some of the magic stuff that's going on. Of course, you have Tina, who is very much the reporter. She's trying to get to the bottom of things. And then, of course, Queenie's mind abilities. I mean, they're all really fun characters, and they still do a good job portraying them. And then someone else I do want to highlight is Jude Law as Albus Dumbledore, who I will tell you right now is really not in this movie that much, but for what he has, Law does a very good job, I think, at embodying who Dumbledore really is, channeling much more of the Richard Harris Dumbledore, the tender side of him, the one who's very caring. He really wants to help his students. You see the impact he's really had on them, and I really did enjoy the Dumbledore that we got here. We do tap into his backstory a little bit, more on that a little bit later on, but I really did like what Law did here. Like I said, he's really not in this movie that much, but for what he has, I think he does a really great job here. And the same, surprisingly, with Johnny Depp, who, going into this film, that was actually the thing I was most hesitant about. I really did not know how he was going to be as Grindelwald, but for what he has, which, again, not in the movie that much, he does a really great job here. Grindelwald is someone who is very intimidating and very powerful, and he's someone that is very inviting. You can see why he has as many followers as he truly does, and while it is, like I said, while he is very much underused in this movie, Depp, you can tell, is very much into this role. He's very dedicated here. I think he really transformed himself, and it didn't just feel like another Depp performance. I actually did feel that he really did, disappear into this role, and I really did like what he did here. I was overall very impressed with Johnny Depp in this film. I think he did a very good job. It's definitely not on the level like Ralph Fiennes or anything, but he still was very solid here. So now I want to get to the directing and the writing, which this is where we get to the more problematic areas with the film. And I will say, directing-wise, the film is still not bad. I think David Yates, for the most part, did a good job directing this film. I mean, hell, he's directed basically every single Potter film, I think, since, like, Order of the Phoenix, so the guy knows what he's doing. It's definitely not his fault that the movie is so tonally inconsistent, but it is still tonally inconsistent. I mean, the movie can't seem to decide if it wants to be just as fun and lighthearted as the first one, or if it's trying to be darker. It seems it's very jarring when it tries to go between those two tones, but I wouldn't really fault Yates for that. I think he did as good of a job as he possibly could to try to juggle everything. You know, he tried to direct the movie. He understands the Harry Potterverse, and I don't think it's his fault for what this movie ended up being. Who I absolutely am going to put the blame on is J.K. Rowling, who I will say it right now, I've heard people compare her to George Lucas, and it is a very apt comparison because I really don't know what she's doing here. I understand that she's written books, but I think she needs to understand that books and movies are two completely different mediums, and the way this film plays out, there's a lot of stuff here that is just very unfocused. My biggest issue with this film, you know, amongst a bevy of other things, the biggest issue for me with this entire film is that it's very unfocused. There's like 4 or 5 plots going on throughout this entire movie, and a lot of them just don't really fit in here. Sure, we do have a lot of stuff with the core 4 in this movie. They do have a lot to do. The problem is this film makes a very strange decision in splitting them up throughout the majority of the film. Tina's off doing her own thing. Jacob and Newt, they pretty much are together throughout most of the film. Those are the two who have the most, like, interactions of the 4. But Queenie, on the other hand, she's, like, far away from all of them in this film. She's off doing her own thing, and it becomes very convoluted in that sense. And on top of all that, that's not all you're dealing with in this film. You're also dealing with the character of Credence. They're trying to get into him a little bit more and trying to get more into his backstory of what he's really trying to do, where he's trying to figure out his true origins and things like that. And again, while that's an interesting idea, the film just does not really seem to have an idea of what it really is about. And I know you guys are probably like, well, what about Grindelwald? Why haven't you mentioned Grindelwald? Well, that's because despite the fact that I told you that's the plot of this movie, that's not really what this movie's about. The reason I told you is because I don't really know what this movie's about. I don't really know what the plot of this movie is because, like I said, there's like 4 or 5 different things going on only within Newt and Jacob's plotline. I mean, they start off the movie and they need to track down Tina, then suddenly they need to track down Credence, and then it becomes about Grindelwald, and even at that, it still is very confusing. There's a lot of characters here that I think they just did not really need to introduce, and that's really the problem. I think J.K. Rowling, she just bit off way more than she could possibly chew here, and I think she really does need to take a step back and just really, someone needs to be stifling her. Someone really needs to be advising her and say, all right, yeah, no, you can't do that. That's just, it's a little too heavy-handed, and you definitely do see that here. I mean, the film itself, it feels very fragmented, it feels very disconnected, and there's a lot of things in here that I think she very much could have scaled back on. A big example of this is the character of Leta Lestrange, who, admittedly, I really do enjoy. I like what they do with her in this film, which, let me just tell you, a lot of the character stuff I do enjoy in this film, but similar to a lot of the stuff I liked, it's stuff that I think they very much could have waited on. I don't think we needed to get all of the development we get with Leta Lestrange in this film. They maybe could have hinted at it, and they could have shown her here and there, but you know, considering what they end up doing with her, I think that potential was very much untapped. I think there was a lot of stuff they could have done with her, and they just simply didn't. And again, it's not Zoe Kravitz's fault. It's really not the character's fault either, because there is some good stuff there, but I just never really felt like we needed Leta Lestrange in this movie, and I think there was definitely a big missed opportunity here. Also, the other big thing that does disappoint me about this film is that while I said the first one very much tried to stand out on its own and try to create its own universe, The Crimes of Grindelwald is totally reliant on previous lore and things that we have already been introduced to. And a big example of this is what they try to do with Dumbledore, where they're trying to get you to come back to Hogwarts, and you're seeing it, and it's fun to watch. Like, I like seeing Dumbledore teach all these other students, but it's not really, it doesn't really need to be a huge part of this movie. I mean, we very briefly touch upon the history between him and Grindelwald, and I thought that was going to be a major part of this movie, and it's really not. It's really only like one or two scenes where we get into like the history between them, and again, that was something that I really wish the film had dived a lot more into, because I think it could have been a lot more interesting if we would have seen the bond that these two really had. You know, it's hinted at, but to me, it feels like something that Warner Brothers is just not ballsy enough to really do. I understand that this is supposed to be a sort of like love story. I believe that Dumbledore was gay, and it was like sort of like an unrequited love thing. And for some reason, the film does not want to dive into that. The film doesn't want to really talk about that. And it's like, why even bring that up if you're not going to talk about it? And sure, there are future installments, but this film just kind of breezes over it, and I think it would have been one of those things where it would have been a hell of a lot more interesting than what we do end up getting in this movie. Like, for instance, the film for some reason wants to focus on the character of Nagini, but not really. It brings her up a couple times, and, you know, we know obviously Nagini is going to be Voldemort's most loyal servant, and they're going to be teaming up, and eventually she's going to turn into a snake, and she's not going to be able to change back, but throughout this movie, she really does not serve much of a purpose at all. She's just kind of there. She's one of the people that, you know, sure, she's like helping Grindelwald and things like that, but she really does not serve a larger purpose in this movie, and that really does go to most of the characters in this film as well. There simply is just way too much going on here, and I think they really should have sat down with J.K. Rowling. I think someone should have co-wrote the film with her, and they really could have thought over, you know, what can we do in this film, and what can we really wait on, because that's something this film just does not seem to understand, that there are still 3 movies to go. There's a lot of stuff that she very much could have waited on, and I think it was definitely a mistake to introduce as much as she did in this film. Also, in regards to Grindelwald as a villain, as good as Johnny Depp is, he is kind of wasted in this film. In fact, he's really not in it all that much. The movie's called The Crimes of Grindelwald, but to be honest, I don't think it really warrants that title, because it's not really about Grindelwald. Again, I don't know what the movie's about. There's like 4 or 5 things going on, and Grindelwald, yes, is one of them, but he's not in the movie as much as you really would have expected him to be, and he's really not in the movie until the 3rd act. And this leads me to another big problem with the film, is that the first 2 acts are very little stakes. So there's really not a lot going on in the first 2 acts of this movie. It's very lighthearted. It is admittedly fun to watch, but it also is very convoluted and very hard to follow at points, because we're going from, you know, this one storyline, then you don't see the other characters in that other storyline until like 20 minutes later. And again, I think the film really does have a problem when it comes to its storytelling, and Grindelwald is a big example of that. I mean, he's someone that, he's supposed to be the big bad of this series, and I really did not feel his presence until maybe the last 20 or 15 minutes of this movie, which the climax itself, yeah, it is well done, but it feels rushed. It feels like we're getting into this way too soon, and that's something that the Harry Potter series did really well. It built up who Voldemort was, so once he eventually arrived, we really did feel his presence. We knew exactly what he was capable of, and you know, he became much more of a mainstay as it went on. This film, on the other hand, wants to do every possible thing it can do with Grindelwald, but not till the third act, and it wants to believe that we already know who Grindelwald is, and we just simply don't, and it just, with this film at least, I do not hold him to that standard that Voldemort is, but the film really wants you to believe that he is this really, deadly guy, and we do get this really great opening scene with him, but after that, we just don't really see a ton of him, and again, I think there was a real mistake here. Overall, the film is just a mess. I mean, I could say as much as I wanted with the writing, but it's so messy that you'd think that someone else was writing the film with Rowling, but it really is Rowling that is the problem here. I will say, the cinematography in this film is still really good. The creature designs and things like that, they still look really good. The world building, I definitely do enjoy. The film is a little bit darker, though, and at points, it comes off a little bland. I mean, there's a lot of scenes that take place in the dark, and it isn't the most visually pleasing of the Harry Potter films for sure. I think the first one had a much better sort of aesthetic to it, and, I do like what they do here, but they don't really do that much with it taking place in France. I mean, there's a couple things they do here and there, but in the first one, there was a very distinct difference between the American Ministry of Magic and the British Ministry, and there's not really that much of a difference here. And again, I think that was another missed opportunity, but the cinematography overall, it is good. It's definitely not one of the problems of this movie. James Newton Howard's score, as usual, is really great here. It really does keep you in the moment, and it's one of the things that did keep me somewhat invested in this film. That's one of the reasons why I can't say this film is boring, because I did enjoy the score here, and I enjoyed what we got out of it overall. But again, the editing in this film is just a giant mess. It is very inconsistent. The first two acts, there's really not a ton going on. It's just kind of a fun adventure. And then the third act, they rush everything. And there's a lot of things that are introduced in the third act that just don't make a lot of sense. One character shift especially is probably one of the most questionable decisions I've seen of the entire year. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know why this character had to go in this direction, but it just doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. And the film wants to, wants us to believe that this character would do this thing, and it just doesn't make sense why they would go in this direction. Yeah, the editing really is a mess here, and the way the film does conclude, the ending of this film is, again, a huge head-scratcher. I mean, I really don't know where they're really going here. There's 3 films left in this series. 3. And you'd think there's 1, because the film ends in a way where it feels like it's setting up like the final movie of this series, and it's not doing that. There's still a lot more story to tell, and again, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why J.K. Rowling should have really thought about, okay, what do I really want to include in this movie? Because there's a lot of things that she could have saved for the other films, and the fact that she included as much as she did here, it really makes me fearful of what the next 3 movies are really going to entail. Like, what else can we really dive into here? Where else can the story go? I really don't know, to be honest with you. This entire film, at first, it feels really pointless. At first, it feels like there's a lot of things going on here that don't need to happen, but so much happens in that third act, in those last 20 minutes, that I just don't know where else the series can really go at this point. Let me put it to you this way. The way people talked about The Last Jedi last year, and they thought it was, this terrible movie that ruined the lore and things like that, that's kind of how I feel about Crimes of Grindelwald. Now, admittedly, I don't think this is a bad film. I really don't. I just think it's a very messy film that just didn't really have much of a main focus, and it is a series that I do want to enjoy. I enjoy the Harry Potter movies a lot. I enjoyed the Fantastic Beasts film. I really was hoping this film would somewhat impress me. I was hoping that maybe the trailers were just a sign of them trying to keep what the movie was really about, but in the end, this film just made me not really that excited to see where the series really ends up going from here. There is still potential, I suppose, but just considering the way things end, I really don't know what they're going to do from here, and it's not really something that I'm all that curious about. I do still enjoy these 4 characters. There are some interesting things overall that they introduce, but there are also way too many things going on. The film does not seem to know what it wants to be. It has a a very inaccurate title. It has some really cool action scenes, but the action scenes alone, they just are they don't really mean much of anything. There's a lot of arbitrary things going on in this movie. There are character shifts that just don't really make a lot of sense, and the way the film ends especially is very baffling to me. The Crimes of Grindelwald overall was a huge disappointment, and I am definitely going to give Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald a C. I know it sounded like I hated this movie more than I did, but truthfully, I didn't hate this movie. Like I said, I enjoy the 4 characters. I enjoy a lot of the things they introduced here. I just thought a lot of it was a little too soon. Like, that's really the best way to look at it. It's too soon, and considering how much they introduced here, I really don't know what else there is left to do in this series besides, you know, the stuff that they leave us on. I just don't really know what else they can really do here, but that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall. Left your thoughts on it. Did you enjoy it? Did you not like it? How does this compare to the first one for you? But that's my review. Hope you enjoyed. See you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.